Hello, Facebook. There is nothing quite as daunting as being live on Facebook. Now, I do videos often, but there's just something about it being in real time, it being live. Maybe it's the fact that you can see who's watching or who's not watching, and it's like it's out there, it's vulnerable, it's raw. So I typically will record and then upload the videos onto YouTube, onto my Nobody But Somebody YouTube channel. But today I really felt like I needed to rip the band-aid off, so to speak, of my insecurity of going live on Facebook. So I'm gonna try this and then see how it goes, and then I will upload this video onto the YouTube channel to archive it or whatever, so you can watch it later and I can watch it later, because what I want to share with you all today is something that the Lord has just made come alive to me. Now, it has been probably 2 months since I have had this aha moment while I'm reading my Bible, and it's been quite discouraging, honestly. I've been going through a little bit of a dry season, and I'll talk more about that as we go along, but it was just really nice to finally get some clarity on what I've been dealing with, and I just want to help somebody as much as God has helped me this morning with this study. So what I am going to be talking about is coming out of the wilderness into the promised land. And if you haven't guessed it already, this is based off of the story of the children of Israelites coming out of Egypt and into the promised land. I am focusing in Deuteronomy. I know it's quite a long story, and this may actually have to be a 2 or 3 part study. So I was going to dive in this morning to a self-help book that is Bible-based as part of my devotion and prayer time. And I really felt like the Lord spoke to me and was like, no, the best self-help book that you can read right now is the Bible. So I felt drawn to the story of the Israelites going from the wilderness into the promised land. And so first of all, it starts off where you're in Deuteronomy chapter 1, and it talks about how the Israelites refused to enter into the land that God provided for them. So Deuteronomy 1 and 22 says that the Israelites did not want to go up. So I'm assuming that this land that God gave them was up on a hill, because it says they did not want to go up. So they said, let's send a few men to scope it out and see if it's safe. And I was like, I like to try to make it applicable to where we live today. And so I thought, how many times do we as humans send someone else to, or rely on somebody else to affirm or assure us what God has already spoken over our lives? The things that we already know are right and true, we want desperately for a man or a woman to validate, to affirm, to assure us. And that's what the Israelite people were doing. They were like, that's a scary place that we've never been before. So I want to see what other people think, and they can scope it out and see if it's safe. And maybe after that I'll go. And that's just how we are as humans. We want to control things. We want to know exactly what's coming up, exactly what to expect. And anytime we have to go into anything new at all, there's always this insecurity. There's always this uncertainty, and we agonize over the unknown. And it's funny because as adults, we'll tell our kids, you can do hard things. And then when us adults have to do something out of our comfort zone, we don't practice what we preach to our kids. And we can do hard things, not of ourselves, but because of God through us. So the Israelites sent a couple of men to scope out the land and tell them if it was safe. And the men came back with fruit from the land, and as proof that the land was good. Okay, God had already spoken that it was a land flowing with milk and honey, that it was going to have everything that they could ever desire, that they were no longer going to have to be slaves anymore. And they were like, oh, I don't know if I want to go in that land because there's giants there and I don't know what to expect. So I'm going to break this down to what are the giants in our life today that hold us back from our full potential, because we live way, way, way below our potential and where God wants us. Deuteronomy 1:26 talks about the children of Israel would not go up the mountain into the promised land that God had given them, the good land that had been provided for them. And they started to murmur, and God got very angry at them. And I started thinking about things that we say today that we disqualify ourselves from doing hard things or doing things for the Lord or going back to school or starting a new job or having children or getting married or whatever. And so I was like, okay, what are some things that I have murmured that I have used to disqualify myself from doing and possessing the things that God has already given to me? And I just wrote a couple things down here. Let's see. I'm not good enough. I don't have the right pedigree. I'm too frail. I'm too weak. What about my kids? What about my family? What's going to happen to them if I do X, Y, Z? Will they be okay? Will I have enough finances? I'm not as strong as so-and-so. And I imagine that they were like, I don't want to climb up that hill. It's going to be hard on the kids. I don't want to climb up that hill because everybody's going to see how out of shape and how weak I am. And I'm not as strong as Bill. I'm just going to use that as an example. And I don't want to look like a fool and look weak as I start trudging up that hill into the promised land that God gave us. And this is the thing. They didn't believe that what God was giving them was good. They were like, they actually started whining and complaining and saying, why are you such a cruel God? Actually, what they said specifically in Deuteronomy 1:7, it says, the Lord hates us, said the Israelites. He took us out of the land of Egypt into the hands of the Amorites. So it's funny because I literally have been dealing with this myself, and you guys are just this is just the way it is. This is where God has put me, to be vulnerable, to be transparent, to be honest. And I'm just going to tell you right now that there are things that I felt like God was giving me. And lately I have felt so weak and so frail. And I was like, God, why do you hate me? Why are you so cruel? Why did you take me out of bondage? Take me out of depression, take me out of anxiety, take me out of hopelessness just to make me uncomfortable. And I really, truly have been feeling like maybe God doesn't care about me as much as I thought he did. And so when I read this, it just slapped me in the face because I was like, oh my gosh, I'm doing exactly what the Israelite people did to God. And we can learn so much from this story of what not to do and how to avoid, I believe, a lot of heartache. So, if you're honest with yourself, do you view God as cruel? Every time you go through something, are you like, God's forsaken me? Where is he? He's not talking to me. Everything's going to pot. My life sucks. Everything's horrible. Or do you, like Job, never curse God and know with assurance that God is with you and you have the faith that can move mountains? If you're that person, kudos to you. I personally have not mastered the art of having unwavering faith in the midst of trials. And so the Israelites said, the Lord hates us. He took us out of Egypt just to deliver us into the hand of somebody else, and we're just going to be a slave to them. So for me personally, God took me out of anxiety. God took me out of depression. God took me out of hopelessness. And I thought it would be smooth sailing from here. But what I'm finding is that I can either be hopeless without God, or I can be uncomfortable for God. And so in light of that, I am live today on Facebook because I'm willing to be uncomfortable for God. I'm just being transparent here. I still worry about the future. I still worry about what people think about me. I still worry if I step out of the norm, what are people going to say? I still feel like I need affirmation from others. These are things that I'm still struggling with and I may never get over. To be honest, I may never get over. And that was really bugging me too, because I was like, am I ever going to be, I mean, really, to be honest, it's like seeking perfection. Am I ever going to get a hold of this stuff? And I'm going to dive into that a little bit more here. I'm getting way ahead of myself. So every time that we do something out of our comfort zone, we feel intense discomfort and insecurity. And it seems that in those moments, when you do step out and you do something that's way out of your comfort zone, your insecurities are magnified, your weaknesses are magnified. And I think that's why so many of us don't do it, because we don't want to look weak and we don't want to look frail. But the thing is, God doesn't need our strengths. He does his best work with our weaknesses. And I was thinking about, some of the most amazing, incredible stories of overcomers throughout history, and stories that we see go across social media are showing the weaknesses of men and women and how they overcame. We don't celebrate, somebody that's got it all together and is perfect. We celebrate the weaknesses and like, wow, you survived even though you were abused. You survived even though you had a terminal illness. Wow. So, there is beauty in weakness. And so for me, I'm trying to grasp that and embrace that there is beauty in weakness, and God can do more with the weakness than he can with your strength. He doesn't need our strength. He's strong all by himself. So personally, I had the thought, God, I thought you took me out of weakness. I thought I would be brand new and I would have it all together and I'd be able to stand strong finally after all the years of agony and all the years of grief. And I'm finding that that's just the way it is here on this earth. Now, I'm not trying to be depressing or anything, but if everything was smooth sailing here on this earth, we would build a kingdom here and we would never want to leave. We would never want to go to heaven. Heaven would not be appealing to us. Serving God would not be appealing to us. And the truth of the matter is, you do not grow when things are smooth sailing. You grow the most in the midst of complete turmoil and chaos. Adversity will make you or break you. So the Lord spoke to me earlier this week and he said, can you give me your yes, even if I don't tell you what you're saying yes to? So it's kind of like that thing where you're like, let's say you're at a comedy show and they say, I need a volunteer, and they don't tell you what they need you to volunteer for. Nobody wants to raise their hand because it's like, I don't know what you're going to do to me. Are you going to throw a pie at my face? Are you going to dunk me in water? What are you going to do to me? And so when God asked me, will you give me your yes without knowing where I'm taking you? I was like, and this is kind of funny. I was like, well, God, I'm going to have to pray about it. And I told my husband that, and he was like, you told God that you're going to have to talk to him about that? You're going to have to pray to him about that? And I'm like, yeah, I did. So it's just funny. So back to the children of Israel. I feel like the children of Israel, they felt like they had to choose between the lesser of two evils. They were like, I can either go back to Egypt where I was a slave, or I can cross over into this promised land. And they didn't see it as a promise. They saw it as there's giants there, the Amalekites are there, Amorites are, is that right? Amorites, yes. Amorites are there. And I don't know what that's going to look like. Will I be in slavery again? Will I be in bondage again? I'm sure they had all kinds of what ifs, all kinds of questions. And that's what we do to God too. It's like, well, why this God and why that and why? And we don't just blindly trust. We're just not wired that way. It's something that I would love to get better at, and I'm actively working on it, but it's not natural to us. So they felt like they had to choose between the lesser of two evils. So for me personally, I'm like, I know that I can't go back to that state that I was in as a young person and as a child. I was a slave to my moods and my emotions. I was a slave to anxiety. I was a slave to depression. It was a very hopeless existence. And I know that I cannot go back. That's my Egypt, and I can't go back there. But to like the disciples, they left everything and they followed Jesus. That took a lot of guts, because they didn't know what to expect. They didn't know what they were going to be walking into. But it's either go back to hopelessness or be uncomfortable serving the Lord. I know it had to be uncomfortable for the disciples. They slept on the ground. They slept wherever they could. They didn't know where their money was going to come from. They didn't know where their food was going to come from, but they trusted, and they grumbled too. They grumbled sometimes, but they followed Jesus regardless. So what an example they set for us. So let's see, where am I at? I'm at Deuteronomy 128 at this point, and at this point in the story, the Israelites felt weak and incapable of going into new territory, just like I have been, just like some of you I'm sure have been. So for some of us, our addictions have become a part of our identity. For some of us, we don't know who we're going to be without the hurt, without the bitterness, without the resentment, without the victim's mentality. We don't know who we're going to be without the anxiety. We can't even fathom a world without anxiety. When I tell people that the Lord has helped me greatly with anxiety, they look at me like, how is this even possible? Because anxiety is such a prevalent thing in our world today. And it's no secret. I make no secret about it at all. It's part of my testimony. The weaknesses that I went through, the debilitating anxiety and depression, and it stemmed from sexual abuse and trauma. But not only that, I can talk about that all day. I was the victim of that, but that took me into places of trying to control things that were not in my control. That took me into my teenage years of struggling with sexual promiscuity and pornography. And for some of us, we don't know who will be without those things. So for some of you, anger might be part of you, and it's like these things become like an addition to our five senses. And it's like, I don't know who I am without that. I don't know a life without that. But I'm here to tell you today that it is possible to have a life without all of that. With the Lord, all things are possible. So we don't know how we're going to function without being in bondage or in slavery to the thing that we're dealing with right now. And I had this thought the other day. I was observing somebody and that is in the throes of addiction, and I was like, they are a slave in their own body. And that's really what happens. We can talk about, for a lot of us, we don't understand slavery in the physical sense. But what about being a slave to anxiety? What about being a slave to addiction? What about being a slave to pills? What about being a slave to anger or fear or bitterness or depression? We become slaves to these things, and it is not the way that God intends for us to live. So we don't know what to expect if we come out of this bondage, because we've been here for so long. It becomes a part of our identity. So I was miserable, abused, anxious, and the thing is, it's like, that's a horrible existence, but you know what to expect there. And that's how the Israelite people were. They knew what to expect in Egypt, and they were very tempted to go back to slavery because they knew that they would have food. They knew that they would have shelter. They knew what their job would entail day in and day out. And so they wanted to gravitate back to their past. And that's what we struggle with today. We struggle with growth. We struggle with stepping into the unknown territory because our we got comfortable in our dilemma, so to speak. So it's funny, really, if you think about it, that we feel safer in slavery and in bondage to our addictions, hurts, habits, and hang-ups, but yet it's so hard to break that cycle. So then we come to Deuteronomy 29 and 30, and I encourage you to read this whole book of Deuteronomy. And God says to the people, dread not, neither fear or be afraid of them. The Lord your God, which goeth before you, he shall fight for you. Don't you remember all that he did for you in Egypt? So I have talked to a lot of people and heard great testimonies. And even in the midst of, being addicted to drugs and alcohol and prostitution and all kinds of horrific things, people have met Jesus right in the middle of their bondage. And I think if we really looked, I think every single one of us could think of a story, think of a scenario where God did something in a very miraculous way. There's a song that we sing at our church and it says, I should have been dead. I should have lost my mind, but God has been better than good to me. And I think that if we would think about some things that maybe we avoided, that we didn't even know God was protecting us from. He went before the Israelites to prepare the way for them. He had already parted the Red Sea. He had delivered them from the Egyptians. He had produced manna from heaven, so food from heaven, and water from a rock. He had done all these things, and he even spoke to them through a fire, and he had done all these things, and yet they still were like, I don't know if I can cross into this promised land that God has given me because it's too scary. And we're like that. We are so like that. I am. It's like I start going through a trial and it's like, God has left me. Why does God hate me? Why am I going through this? And I forget all of the good things that he has done in my life personally. When I really look back and I assess my life and what I've been through in the past 3 years alone, not even farther back than that, but I could go farther back than that, there has been some miraculous healing in my life. Now, some things are still being healed and it's a process, but there has been some miraculous healings where God literally delivered me in an instant. But it's so easy to forget when he starts tugging on you to do something new or to draw closer to him and try something that you've never done before. It's like, oh my God has forgotten me. He's left me, and he hasn't. But that's where our mind goes, just like the children of Israel. So when we actually step completely into our potential, it's going to introduce you to a life you didn't even know was possible. And I'll say for me, when there was a lot of things that I claimed as my identity. I was like, oh, I'm just an introvert. I'm just this, I'm just that. I can't travel because I get too bad of anxiety and I can't do this and I can't do that. And as the Lord has begun to heal me, I have realized that there are some things that I was saying were part of my identity and part of my personality that aren't. It was the hurt that was speaking. It was the hurt that was causing me to do those things. Those are not a part of me. And there are things, I'm sure, in all of our lives that God is like, I want to heal you from that. If you will draw close to me, if you will seek first my kingdom, then all these things that you need will be taken care of for you. So I have this quote here, and it's from a book I'm reading, and it says, we are actually royalty with the mentality of slaves. 1 Peter 2:9, but ye are a chosen generation, a royal priesthood, and holy nation, a peculiar people, that ye should show forth the praises of him who hath called you out of darkness into his marvelous light. So we let our past and the opinions of others define who we are. But the only one who has the right to define anything is the Creator himself. The only one that really truly has the power and the authority to define you and me is our Creator, Jesus Christ. And he says that we are royal priesthood and that we are a peculiar people. So we're supposed to be a little bit weird. And that is something that I've struggled with most of my life. It's like, I don't want to be weird. I don't want people to think that I'm, this and this and this. And it's like, well, too bad, because That's part of being royalty. You're weird. So welcome to all of my weird today. Okay, so I am looking at Deuteronomy 2:24, and it says here, rise ye up, take your journey and pass over the river Aaron. Behold, I have given into thine hand Sihon the Amorite, king of Heshbon, and his land. Begin to possess it and contend with him in battle. This day will I begin to put the dread of thee and the fear of thee into the nations that are under the whole heaven, who shall hear report of thee and shall tremble and be in anguish because of thee. So what this is saying is that God went before the Israelites and he began to plant thoughts and seeds of fear and terror in all the world. They would hear about the Israelites and they would begin to shiver and they would begin to quake, because they were like, the Israelites are coming and they're a powerful people and they're going to destroy us. And the reality is, if you read this whole chapter, it says over and over and over again that the Israelites were actually a very small group of people in comparison to some of the other tribes. But God went before them and he prepared the way before them and he made a way. They were weak. They were truly weak within themselves. But God went before them and he gave them the land by creating fear and terror in the hearts of everybody that they were going to come in contact with. So I had a side note here, and it says, you have rule, dominion, and authority over a lot of things that are much, much bigger than us because of our birthright. It's not because we're anything special. It's because of the God in us. It's not because we're big. It's not because we're powerful. It's not because we have anything good within ourselves. It's because of the power and the might of God. And so then it goes down to Deuteronomy 2:31. And the Lord said unto me, behold, I have begun to give Sihon and his land before thee. Begin to possess, that thou mayest inherit his land. So what I got from this was, we need to know God's timing, when to war and when to be at peace. If he gives it to you, you've already won. So there's a lot of things that we're going through and we're like, I don't know how I'm ever going to get through this. I don't know how God is going to provide X, Y, and Z. And everything looks impossible to us. But if God has given it to you, it is yours. Your name is already on it. So it says down here in verse 36, there was not one city too strong for us. The Lord our God delivered all unto us. And it wasn't because they were anything special. It wasn't because they were mighty warriors. It wasn't because they had intellect or anything. It was literally because God delivered it to them. He made a way when there seemed to be no way. So, whoop, I'm about to drop all my notes here on the floor. Where am I at? Okay, so when you actually, we already read that. I'm going to go to my next page here. So we let our past and the opinions of others define who we are, but the only one that truly has the right to define us is Jesus himself. So quite often it is our own personal insecurities that make us feel like other people are viewing us negatively, but it's not them. That's the problem. It's really us who has the problem. And we think that people are viewing us a certain way, and really it's you and your own insecurities. Deuteronomy 1:41, the Israelites, they decided to back up and they decided to buck up. And they're like, okay, we'll after crying and saying, God, why do you hate us? And grieving the Lord and making him angry, they were like, okay, we'll go into the land. Because they felt guilty. They had sinned against God. They knew they had been disobedient, and they were like, okay, we'll go. But God spoke to Moses saying, tell them not to go in fighting, because they were like, oh, we'll just go in and we're going to fight the Amorites. We're going to fight them. It'll be fine. You know, we've had our little pity party. We threw a fit. Now we're going to go. And so God said, tell them not to go in fighting. I'm not going to be with them this time. So they presumed that God would be with them in the fight, but he wasn't, because they were so wishy-washy and didn't listen when he told them to go the first time. So they did not pass the test, so to speak. I believe that we wander around in the wilderness, our personal wildernesses, because God will test us and he will try to teach you a lesson and you don't get it. And so he's like, okay, well, I'm going to have to maybe teach you this in a different way. We'll come about this in a different way. Just like we have to do with our kids, you know, there's repetition. And it's like, okay, they didn't get it the first time. Let's try this a different way. I think that's how God does us. There's a scripture, and I don't know where it's found. I'm horrible at knowing the context of where it's found, but it says that God will chastise those he loves. Just like a father will chastise his children, he corrects those that he loves. So if God is correcting you, it's not because he hates you, it's because he loves you, and he's like, I'm going to give him another chance to get this. Which has been something that's been hard for me, because it's like when I don't get it the first time, I beat myself up. And I think we all do that, and we just get really frustrated. So God told Moses that he wasn't going to be with them if they went in gun blazing and tried to kill the Israelites. So you know, and I've heard this my whole life. You know, the Israelites wandered around in the wilderness for 40 years. And to be honest, I always was like, okay, well, they wandered around in the forest and they had their campfire and they had to scavenge for food and they had to build their own, you know, little shelters, and they just wandered around in the wilderness because God was like, sorry, you're not ready for the promised land right now because you didn't learn the lesson that I was trying to teach you. And so, as I was reading it today, I realized that they actually fought a lot of battles. It wasn't just like a peaceful time. They actually fought with 4 different tribes. And I was going to count how many different families and kings and different ones that they had to fight with. They fought a lot. The Canaanites, Amorites, and the Midianites. I think I'm missing one, but anyway. But these tribes represent the root problems in our human nature that plague mankind: idolatry, immorality, and pride. Each battle they fought occurred during a time of great weakness for Israel. So it takes a lot of faith and courage to determine the outcome in the face of an overwhelming attack, and it takes total obedience to the Lord's will in our lives. There are only 2 good reasons to do anything, and that would be, number 1, because God wants you to, and number 2, because you want to please God. So I can't help but wonder how many battles the Israelites would have avoided had they been instantly obedient. Their perspective was that the giants in the promised land were larger than God, and that's the truth of it. When you have such little faith and you're like, that is way too big for me to tackle. Yeah, you're right. It is. It's way too big for you to tackle, but you're not doing it on your own. God is with you. God is your source. He goes before you. It says it over and over and over in his word. In Deuteronomy alone, I think it says it like 5 or 6 times that he went before the Israelites and he let them possess the land. He made a way for them to fight things that they never should have been able to fight. He gave them rule and reign and dominion and authority over things that were way bigger than them. So yeah, you're right. You can't do it on your own, but you have a God that is helping you. And so that's something that I've had to do when this little nagging voice comes out in my ear and says, you can't do this. You're a failure. You're too small. You're too weak. You're too this. You're too that. I'm like, you're right. I can't. But the Lord is my strength and my helper. He is my rock, my shield, my fortress, my ever-present help in time of need. And I'm doing it with him. So even in the wilderness, though, this is the crazy thing. God is so good that even in the wilderness, even in the middle of their dilemmas, so let's put it in context of things that we deal with today: depression, anxiety, abuse, marital issues, poverty, addiction. Even we're so spoiled in America, I'll just put it that way. Even in the midst of our dilemma, even in the midst of everything that we struggle with, we really lack nothing. And so it's amazing to me that we turn on God so quickly, and I'm saying this for myself because I'm guilty of it. Deuteronomy 2:27 speaks about how God gave them the upper hand by creating fear in the heart and the minds of their enemies. Like I said that already. But what I really learned about this today too was that the wilderness is a teaching ground. So if you're in a teaching ground, if you're in a teaching season, you're in a wilderness season. You're in a wilderness season of learning big things for the promises that are ahead. God has to teach us things so that he can trust us with those things, and so that we don't self-destruct when he gives us more. Deuteronomy 4:29 through 31 talks about how God is merciful when we repent. He knows our limitations. He knows how hard it is for us to grasp his teachings. Just as the children needed repetition, so do we. And then in Deuteronomy 4:35, God reminds them of the many signs and the wonders that he performed, so that he would know, so that the Israelites would know who God was, and that there's none else above him. And how many times has God shown up and shown out for us? He's proved to us over and over and over and over again that he is God and there is none else above him. Romans 4:38 talks about how because he loves us, he gives us power over things that might be stronger than I am. And I'm saying that multiple times because it's multiple times in Deuteronomy where it says God gave us power over and rule over things that are much bigger and much stronger than us. It's not anything within us except for God himself that makes this happen. I can't ever be good enough. I can't ever be smart enough, pretty enough, intelligent enough, book learned enough to face some of the challenges that I'm going to face in my life or have already faced in my life. So I mentioned this earlier, but I'm going to mention it again. The children of Israel heard God's voice speaking out of fire, something that no other humans that I can recollect had experienced. And even that wasn't good enough to convince them that God was with them and that they could step into the promised land regardless of the giants that live there. So how many times have we thought that the things that in the past that happened to us could have killed us, but they didn't? And there's a saying that a lot of people have said, thank God I don't look like the hell I've come through. Yeah, for real. Sometimes I'm like, that was a rough day. I'm pretty sure I look dead. And then I look in the mirror and it's like, oh, maybe not, but I feel dead. And so it's like, but we have such a hard time believing that God is with us and that he has gone before us and is making things possible for us when we step into new territory, because we are such an insecure people. Our insecurities and our fears keep us bound from living in the full potential that God has for us. He wants us to dwell with him in heavenly places. And then it goes into the 10 Commandments, where God instructs them of all the things that they need to do in order to live a victorious life and to be pleasing unto him. So before the children could step into the promised land that God already had for them, they had to learn that, and this is where I'm putting it into context of today, okay? We have to learn that the way we were raised isn't necessarily right in God's eyes. We have to realize that the culture of this world and the things that are fed to us are not necessarily what God has for us. We have to realize that the habits that we have formed are not necessarily what God intends for us to live, that this is bondage and we are not to be slaves to these things. We have to realize that God does not intend for us to live under anxiety and depression and fear and addiction and rejection and resentments and bitterness. And so during this wilderness season, God was teaching them that their human nature, their carnal human nature, wasn't how he wanted them to live. So it was a training ground for them. So there's always a period and a season of great learning before you go into the promised land. And I am going to just say this because I've experienced it so many times and maybe will help somebody. And I'm not saying that I've arrived or anything. But anytime that the Lord does take me into something new, I feel about that big. I feel so small. And I heard a man describe it this way. He said, the reason that you feel so small is because God has just enlarged your territory. So if you imagine you're standing on this huge mountain and you're overlooking this beautiful valley and you're this big and the valley and the mountain is monstrous. And God's like, I gave you all of that. And it really puts into context, like, God gave me this despite my littleness. And so it helps when you're in that season of, okay, here we go again. God is asking me to grow, to realize that just because you feel small doesn't necessarily mean that God has left you or forgotten you or that he hates you, as the Israelites said, which is so funny to me that they were like, oh God, why do you hate us? Why do you hate me? Okay, so many of us are fighting many giants in our lives. For some, it's addiction. For others, it may be trauma. For another, it may be gossip, slander, persecution, racism, poverty, illness, death, and grief. Because the giants that we fight today and the slavery that we fight today is not typically to another human. It is typically to these sins, this sinful, nasty stuff in our lives. So, in Deuteronomy chapter 7, it lays it all out for us. We are not chosen and loved by God because we're great or because we're anything special. He just chose us just because. He chose us for no apparent reason. He loves us for no apparent reason, with all of our yuck, with all of our hurts, with all of our hang-ups, with all of our anxiety and depression and codependency. And he lays it out so beautifully that if you will just love me, that's what he really wants. He wants us to just love him and keep my commandments. Then he will keep his covenant with us. And I looked up covenant, and I don't know if I have it here or not. No, I don't. But it's like a promise. It's like a binding contract. When you love the Lord with all your heart, when you keep his commandments, he keeps his covenant to you. He keeps that binding contract to you, that he is protecting you, that he is going before you, that he is providing all of the things for you that you need because he loves us. And then, oh, here it is actually, maybe. There's so many scriptures about God keeping covenants with us. So here it is, the concordance, Strong's Concordance. Covenant is an alliance, a pledge between a man or for us. So I'm talking about a pledge between us and Jesus, a treaty, an alliance, a league, a constitution, an ordinance, an agreement, a pledge, an alliance. It's pretty serious. It's a big deal. God makes this pledge with us. But there are going to be seasons too where God reminds you and he humbles you of where your true source of power comes from, that it doesn't come from yourself, that your righteousness is as filthy rags. And when he does that, I'm learning, thank God for mentors, that when you feel things popping back up, it's not necessarily because you've gone backwards, but it might just be because God's like, look, you need to be reminded that you're little. You need to be reminded that your source of power comes from me and not of yourself. And God will do that. He will correct those that he loves. He will remind you of how small you are so that you don't fall into pride and haughtiness and arrogancy. And it says that here in Deuteronomy 8. And my husband said something today or yesterday. He said, when you are searching for righteousness within yourself, all you're going to find is self-righteousness. And I was like, oh my gosh, that's so good. When you try to find goodness within yourself, there's nothing good that lives in me except for Jesus' spirit. There's nothing good that lives in me except for the things that he's given to me. Of myself, I have nothing. And that's what it means. When you realize that, you realize I'm spiritually poor. Without God, I literally am nothing, would be nothing, would have nothing. So in Deuteronomy 8, he lays it out and he says, for it is God that gives you power and wealth, that he may establish his covenant, which he swore by your fathers this day. And let me see if it'll show me. And it says here that he will humble you, that he might prove you. So he's testing you to see if you know where your true source of power comes from. So for me, I've been going through this recently, like I said at the beginning of this video, 2 months of just like, ugh, like what is happening to me, God? Why have you left me, God? Like that's really how I felt. So when I read this today, I was like, oh, okay. Okay, God, I hear you. So I really thought, truly, and this has been like a 3-year process, I really thought that once I overcame anxiety. I didn't overcome anxiety, you guys. I mean, I did a lot of work, but God taught me what to do. He gave me the tools. He gave me the people. He gave me the books. He gave me steps. He gave me everything that I have. It's through him that I overcame anxiety. It's through him. It's not because of me, because if I was trying to live on my own, I would probably have an anxiety attack every single day. But I really thought that, okay, Lord, you delivered me from anxiety attacks and you delivered me from depression, that I would feel strong all the time, that I have arrived. And, but the strength that I have doesn't come from me. It comes from the Lord. And the truth of the matter is there will always be something bigger and stronger and greater than me. And just like it says in Deuteronomy, yeah, those giants are big and they're bigger than you and they could literally squash you. But what they don't have is Jesus. You have Jesus and he goes before you and he makes a way. He literally put fear in the hearts of the giants so that when the Israelites came in to destroy them, it was already taken care of, because we all know that once you succumb to fear, it's like it's all downhill from there. So the giants were so fearful of these little tiny Israelite people, and that's what God does for us. So yeah, there's always going to be something bigger and greater and stronger, and there's always going to be things that are hard to overcome, but I'm not doing it by myself. Deuteronomy chapter 9 says, Hear, O Israel, thou art to pass over Jordan this day to go in to possess nations greater and mightier than thyself, cities great and fenced up to heaven. So God is saying here that it's time for you to go into the promised land, and you're going to possess things that are way bigger than you. And the reason that you can do that is because I love you and I'm with you and I'm keeping my covenant with you. So, and then it says down a little bit further, Understand therefore this day that the Lord thy God is he which goeth before thee as a consuming fire. He shall destroy them, and he shall bring them down before thy face. So shalt thou drive them out and destroy them quickly, as the Lord hath said unto thee. So I just want to encourage you guys today, whatever it is that God has spoken to you, whatever it is that's inside of you, that little seed, and you know it's there, and you're like, I want to do that. I want to do that for the Lord. I want to be mightily used of God. I want to go back to school. I want to start this new career. I want to serve in this capacity or that capacity, but you're like, it's so much bigger than me and I don't know if I can do it. It's okay. God is with you, and he has given you, if he put that inside of you, that dream, that passion, that desire, he put it in you, then he's going to make a way for you to conquer that thing. He's going to make a way and rule and reign over that thing that's so much bigger than you. So the Lord goes before us and he drives out our enemies and destroys them quickly. So yes, addiction, if you're in the throes of addiction, it looks so impossible and it is hard, but with God, nothing is impossible. With God, nothing is impossible. Not anxiety, not depression, not addiction. God can revive the deadest of relationships. Nothing is possible or impossible without God. He drives out these enemies that want to destroy you, and he destroys them. So it is not because I'm strong, and it is not because I am righteous. It is not because there is anything good in me. that makes it so that these things can be driven out, but it is the power of God working through me. And then it says here, I'm going to jump over to Matthew 6:33, but seek ye first the kingdom of God and his righteousness, and all these things shall be added unto you. Now, if you read that full chapter, it's talking about don't give thought about what you're going to eat and what you're going to drink. Doesn't God even care? Doesn't God care about the lilies of the field and the sparrows and the crows and these little animals that are, nothing compared to humans? God cares about them and he will provide for you. And what it's saying here in Matthew is that if you seek first God and his kingdom, then all those things are taken care of. So if you're trying to find what's right within your own self, if you're trying to prove your worth, if you're trying to fill that hole in your soul, so to speak, something might have been completely destroyed you at some point, and you have this gaping wound, this gaping hole in your soul, and you're trying to fill it. You're trying to fill it with money, you're trying to fill it with a title, you're trying to fill it with being somebody, you're trying to fill it with being perfect, you're trying to fill it with controlling your environment, whatever it is. You're trying to fill the pain with drugs, you're trying to fill the pain with alcohol, you're trying to numb it. You've got this hole in your soul and you're trying to find a way out of it within yourself, and you cannot. There is nothing good in you except for God. So the first step in coming out of this slavery and this bondage is to realize that you are not God, that you are powerless on your own, and that your life has become unmanageable. Happy are those who know they are spiritually poor. We must earnestly believe that God exists, that we matter to him, and that he has the power to help us navigate through these trials, these temptations, these tests, these addictions, these hurts, these habits, these hang-ups. But you have to realize that you cannot find that within yourself. Romans 7:18, and this is the Amplified Version, says, "For I know that nothing good lives in me, that is in my flesh, my human nature, my worldliness, my sinful capacity. For I have the willingness to do good. It's in me. I want to do good, but I can't do it." Have you ever found yourself there? It's like, I need to go on a diet. I need to quit eating all that sugar. And the next thing you know, you're shoving your face full of cookies. Well, you know what to do. You know the good, you want to do good, but you can't. That's what it's saying here. To know that you cannot do it on your own is what it means to be spiritually poor, that nothing good lives in me except for Jesus. Let's see. I have so many notes here, you guys. It's insane. I think I'm going to quit for tonight. But I'm going to say this just in closing. The land that God wants to take you into is not like the land of the past. It's not a hopeless land. It's not a land void of love, joy, and peace. It's not a land where you don't know who God is and you don't know who you are. It's not a land where you have to fill that hole in your soul. It's a land where you're complete in the love of God, and you know that you matter to him, and you know that he has the power to help you. It's a land where you know who you are and whose you are. It's a land where you know that God is caring for you right where you're at, that there's a time of war and there's a time of peace. It's a land where you don't feel like you need to compete with others or compare yourself to others. It's a land where you know your purpose. It's a land where you are satisfied and you don't feel emptiness or the need to fill the void with a substance or money or a position or any of those things. That's the land that God's inviting us to. I believe that's what in 2024, the land of promise is walking into a completeness of love with our Heavenly Father. And he doesn't intend for you to be bullied by your past and live in condemnation of the things that you messed up with. Like I said at the beginning of this video, I was sexually abused as a child, and that led me into to the realm of sexual promiscuity. That led me into the realm of a pornography addiction for a time. And God loves me anyway, and he helps me recover, and he's with me, and he's like, I want to give you all of these wonderful promises and this land that's flowing with milk and honey despite what you've done. So don't let the past bully you. And I know that's a process. It took me a long time. It's a process. And sometimes I still have to deal with it. But you don't need to be bound by your past. You don't need to be bullied by your past. And we don't need to be afraid of the promised land either, because it says over and over and over in Deuteronomy that God has gone before us, that he prepared a way, that he's given us dominion and rule as kings and queens above things that are way bigger than us. So if you truly believe that God exists, if you truly believe that he cares for you, and I think that's the part that's so hard for most of us, is to believe that I matter to God, that I matter to him enough that he's taking care of me. It's easy to believe for somebody else. It's easy to cheer for somebody else. But do you believe that that you truly matter to him? And that is my rant for the day. I was very excited when this all got laid out to me this morning, because I've been struggling with it. And it was like, okay, God, I thank you for your correction. I thank you for showing me that I don't have to dwell in this strange land anymore, whatever that means. I don't know what the future holds, but Lord, I trust you, and I am so thankful for where you have brought me from. I am so thankful that you make ways when there seems to be no way. So I just want to encourage you today that if you are wandering around in the wilderness, or maybe you're still bound. Maybe you're still living in the land of Egypt, where you're bound by addiction, where you're bound by bitterness and hurts and abuse, and whatever the case may be, wherever you're at in your journey with the Lord, I want to encourage you that there is a God that loves you, that he sees every hair upon your head, that he knows your name, and he cares for you, and he is here for you as you go on this journey of recovery. Or wherever you're at, we all need to recover from something. I know some people don't think so, but we do. And so I hope this blessed somebody. I am going to upload this onto my Nobody But Somebody YouTube channel. I also have a Nobody But Somebody Facebook page, and I would have gone live there, but they will not let me until that page is like 30 days old or something. So I will archive this. I appreciate all of your prayers. I appreciate all the love and the support. I appreciate everybody that's poured into me, and those that have let me cry on their shoulder and moan and groan and have been patient with me when I act like a spoiled brat. So God bless you all. I hope that you have a great weekend, and until next time, I will see you all later. Bye.